On May 29th of 2026, Kane Pixels Backrooms movie has completely changed the Backrooms lore as we have known it. But there has been one question that I have heard been asked more than any other thing since the movie came out. Why are the entities in the movie nowhere near what we are used to? Well, I have a theory about the movie that will help explain this. For a long time now, a lot of us have believed the Backrooms is just some sort of liminal dimension that we can accidentally step into, and it is an endless space of nothing. And once you get trapped here, you are basically dead. You have to try to find your way out, which is highly unlikely, and so far, according to Kane Pixels universe, no one's made it out alive. But here's the problem, we've been seeing the Backrooms completely wrong. At least Kane Pixels' version, to be precise. You see, while Kane Pixels has some of the generalized themes that can be found on the Backrooms wiki, which is just the basic idea that the Backrooms is just a liminal dimension you can step into, his version to a lot of us felt a lot more deeper and in a lot of ways darker than what we were previously used to. And personally, I favor Kane Pixels Backrooms universe because of this. As we know, in 2019 on 4chan, the classic Backrooms was started. This was a fun and creepy new idea that had never been mostly talked about before. The idea was you could find weak points within our universe and no-clip into a separate dimension of liminal spaces that go on for miles and miles forever. And pretty much once you are trapped into what they called the Backrooms, there was no escape. In a lot of people's minds, the Backrooms was a very simple yet iconic idea. There is even online a massive Backrooms wiki page which goes through in depth every single level of the Backrooms and what you can find and what you can expect. Then there's Kane Pixels Backrooms. Now, as we all know, Kane Pixels is the one that made the Backrooms extremely popular through his own YouTube channel, Kane Pixels, where he uploaded found footage of his own version of the Backrooms. Even though it looked very similar to everyone else's idea of the Backrooms, it had some very key differences. One of them being this, the entities. So far through all of Kane Pixels Backrooms found footage videos, we've only seen two entities, the life form and this, that has never really been able to be classified, although some have believed it to be a still life, a Backrooms copy of a human. When we look at the other side of the Backrooms, for instance the wiki page, there are thousands upon thousands of entities that can be found in the Backrooms. This has led a lot of people to wonder why that is about Kane Pixels' version. And going into the movie, I was asking the same question myself. What kind of entities are we going to be seeing in the movie? Because Kane Pixels clearly told us that this film was directly connected to his found footage series. And so if we had seen the life form and possibly a still life, we could expect to see that in the movie. Well, boy, was I absolutely wrong about this. Because Kane Pixels' version of the Backrooms was something completely different than I ever even imagined. And I believe adds so much lore behind the entities that we saw in his found footage series and makes his story even deeper. The movie starts off with classic found footage dated June 19th, 1990, as we are watching the POV of an async worker named Naren Warren as he is exploring the Backrooms and somehow got separated from the rest of his team. And it's very clear from the found footage that something is following him. He does end up getting chased, however we don't exactly see the entity in full scale. Obviously it's the beginning of the film. After this found footage cuts out, we then get into the meat of the story. We meet a man named Clark who runs a furniture store called Captain Clark's Ottoman Empire, which in the film is made very clear not to be a very successful business. We also learn that Clark has been having some marital problems and was kicked out of his own house by his wife. Clark is then left to live at the furniture store as he tries to run it and make ends meet, trying to follow his dream of becoming an architect. Just look at this man's office, it is covered in architectural drawings. This is what he really wants to do. It's made very clear that Clark is not in the greatest mental state of mind, as he is then also shown going and having therapy sessions with a therapist named Mary, and he shows a lot of signs of built up anger inside of him, but yet isn't willing to admit the fact that he's ever done anything wrong. But after a little bit of character building, the story really starts to pop off. We find out that within Clark's Ottoman Empire furniture store building, there has been an interesting issue with electricity. Sometimes the electricity will randomly come on and will be draining power, causing a higher electric bill. Now obviously this has to be fixed, and so Clark calls an electrician to come and take a look at the building's electricity. They discover some very strange things. For instance, in the panel electrical box, there are added switches that just don't seem right and don't seem to control anything. However, one night when Clark is sleeping in the furniture store, he encounters the same electricity surge and gets fed up with it and decides to figure out what is going on. He walks downstairs, which is primarily where a lot of the issues were coming from, and as he's walking by a wall, he notices a small slit. This, as we all know, is a weak spot between our dimension and the Backrooms. Clark discovers the Backrooms, and to him, he has absolutely no idea what is going on, and I just want to say, the acting in the scene was absolutely amazing. You can definitely tell Clark is wrestling with his own mind here, trying to figure out what's real and what is not. But one thing that is interesting to note here is the first thing that Clark sees when he walks into the Backrooms. A jumbled up, piled together mess of furniture. Furniture that reminisces his own furniture that he sells in his furniture store. And even the atmosphere of the Backrooms itself is very similar to his furniture store. Clark even recognizes this, and when he goes on to explain it to other people, he seems to believe it is some sort of extension of his own store, and that someone is somehow using mirrors to hide the entrance, which gives it the note clipping effect. So Clark keeps going back and forth between the Backrooms and reality, and since he has some experience in architecture, he is able to draw out a pretty decent map of what he can explore through the Backrooms. However, Clark quickly learns that he is not alone. The very first time he's in the Backrooms, he is chased out by what appears to be the same monster that we were introduced to in the found footage from the first sequence of the movie. I think it's also important to note the fact that this creature is definitely very aggressive. Later in the film, Clark has the bright idea to bring back physical evidence of the Backrooms to show his therapist, who didn't believe him when he tried to tell her about the Backrooms. And so bringing two of his employees with him who had a camera, he decides they are going to film their exploration of the Backrooms and go deeper than he has went before. In this sequence, Bobby is lowered into a deeper, darker part of the Backrooms, which is made pretty clear that it appears something has been living here. This is when Bobby is attacked and presumably killed by the main entity of the Backrooms. Kat and Clark then are separated, and Clark takes us on an amazing tour of the Backrooms holding the camera. After running around for a bit, Clark finds Kat, except they are separated by a wall. One thing that I find interesting here is Kat is saying that she can actually see Clark, even though from Clark's perspective, this wall is not a window. And as Clark and Kat are communicating to one another, trying to find a way to get Kat on the other side, the camera that Clark was using, which he had sat down behind him, is picked up by something, presumably the entity. And it's very clear that this entity is very tall. And of course, that's where this scene cuts out. We can't show the entity yet. We then change POVs in the film to Mary, the counselor, as she has not heard or seen anything from Clark for who knows how long. I think this is one interesting aspect about the film, was it didn't actually tell us how long it's been since Clark went into the Backrooms and has not talked to Mary. It could have been hours, days, possibly even weeks. And so Mary goes to Clark's furniture store to try to find him and talk to him. And it is here that she experiences herself the Backrooms, finds the null zone, no clips through the Backrooms, and finds this mystery wonderland. As she explores the Backrooms, she finds what appears to be a very crudely drawn mural of the entity and trying to explain the Backrooms. It's not 100% clear that Clark himself drew this, although I think it's safe to say that he did. Clark then appears out of nowhere and tells Mary to trust him, and then chokes her into unconsciousness. Up until this point in the movie, everything has been fine and dandy. The Backrooms is just another dimension that you can slip into, and yeah, there's some entities in there and everything else. Very classic Backrooms. However, the next sequence, which I called the dinner scene, completely changed what I thought about the Backrooms. Mary awakens and finds herself tied to a chair as Clark is passing out plates to her and also another individual sitting at the table. We then can see that this individual at the table is not the only one there. There appears to be a man sitting in a chair and a red-haired woman standing behind Clark, leaning against the counter of the kitchen that they are in. But there's one thing off about these people. For one, they don't talk, And 2, they look absolutely misformed. Their faces are doubled over on one another with crazy folds, and weird looking parts of them just don't make sense. Clark goes on to explain exactly what they are. These are still lives. And Clark explains that somewhere out in the real world, there are people that look just like this, except they're not twisted and messed up. The Backrooms is a living, breathing entity almost in and of itself that is copying real world things and memories. But it obviously can't create them perfectly one-to-one, which is why everything is distorted and messed up. It also seems that this version of the Backrooms is Clark's own personal memories being formed into the Backrooms. Clark goes on to explain that you can actually eat these still lives and survive in the Backrooms just based off of them. Clark even goes on to talk about the Backrooms as misremembering themselves, and it keeps creating the same scene over and over again, getting it worse every single time. And I think the classic scene which we got from the teaser, which actually ended up in the movie, clearly shows this. We start off with a living room, and the first copy of it from the Backrooms looks very similar. But as you keep going layer down by layer down, it gets worse and worse until it's absolutely unrecognizable. And this, I believe, plays a very strong role into the entities of the Backrooms. Because it's at this scene, the dinner scene, we are introduced to the big bad of this movie. The main entity. I was expecting it to be the life form, however, it's not. This entity is actually a cloned version of Clark himself, dressed up as the mascot from his furniture store, Captain Clark. But obviously, just like the still lifes, he's all distorted and messed up in a very grotesque way. It also seems that the Backrooms has played upon the fact that Clark is a very angry person, which is why this entity is extremely aggressive and only cares about itself. It seems that Clark has met this entity before and even tries to talk to it like he knows it, telling it that Mary, his therapist, has said that they can stay there and live together. However, the entity turns on Clark and attacks him, presumably taking his life. This goes into a crazy chase scene between Mary and Captain Clark as she tries to escape the Backrooms. She then basically falls into the hands of Async and is taken to their laboratory where she is interrogated about what she experienced. And based off of the way that they are treating her, she doesn't even know if she will be kept alive. And that is basically where the movie ended. But let's talk about the entity, the life form, or Captain Clark. Because I have seen so much controversy online for people asking why we didn't get an entity that we all recognized, like the life form, which is literally in Kane Parsons' own first found footage video. So it's not like he didn't ever use it at all. And to be honest, I asked this question myself. But that's when I dug a little bit deeper and found something that I think explains everything. This entity that is in the movie, Captain Clark, is in fact the life form. Let's just do a side-by-side comparison. If we look at how the entity looks in found footage number 1 from Kane Pixels and compare it to Captain Clark, their size and height is extremely similar. And now that we understand more about how Kane Parsons' version of the Backrooms work, I don't believe it's far out of the box to speculate the fact that the bacteria or life form is just a worse misremembered version of Captain Clark. Just like we saw in the teaser for the film, as it was continuing to misremember the living room scene worse and worse as time went on. And so as the Backrooms keeps remembering, or misremembering as Clark puts it, certain details and areas in the real world, those places will become even more distorted up until the point they are absolutely unrecognizable. Also, another piece of evidence is the date in which the movie takes place. The movie is supposed to take place in the year of 1990. However, the first found footage video on Kane Pixels' channel, which actually features the classic life form, is supposed to take place in the year of 1996, over 6 years after the events of the Backrooms movie. And so taking everything we've learned into account of how the Backrooms works, with over 6 years of time, and the Backrooms misremembering things over and over and over, possibly thousands of times, and over 6 years of time, it would make total sense for the pirate to turn into the life form. So I truly believe that the life form actually is in the Backrooms movie. It is Captain Clark, a freshly remembered version of it from the Backrooms. And so I believe that it's possible, if we continue to get Backrooms movies, we will start to see Captain Clark decay into the classic form of the entity, the life form. And I think this gives a very satisfying answer to this question about the Backrooms entities in the movie. And so with that, make sure to check out this video where I explore the creepiest FNAF ARG I have ever seen. And also make sure to subscribe for a weekly indie horror content upload. I hope you enjoyed today's video, and I will see you next time.